Today is a special Sunday, and about 6 months ago, if you were with us, we did a service of testimony where we had two of our members share their testimony. And next week, we begin a new series called Summer Playlist, and we had this sort of as an open Sunday, and began to think and thought this would be a great opportunity to hear one of the saints among us, her story. So I'm going to invite Audrey to introduce our speaker today.
And it is with pleasure that I get to do this. If you've been part of Central for a while, you know Elaine Crowder, because she truly is one of the saints of this church. In fact, she's affectionately known as the Mother Teresa of the United Methodist Church. And I think that's very appropriate. When I started thinking about what to say about Elaine, there is not enough time. This woman epitomizes service. And she epitomizes faithfulness and a loving God. As a young bride, she and her husband, Doug, United Methodist pastor, went to the Congo and spent 38 years serving there. Countless times they had to evacuate for their safety, and they lost everything, like everything. And they started all over again. But they kept coming back. Never did anything like a mere evacuation and fear for their life deter them from living out their purpose that God had given them. Elaine has done so much in the Congo, but also here in Central. There is not, and I literally, not an event that happens here that she does not volunteer for and work at. Some she really enjoys, and others haven't been quite what she was up her alley, like face painting at our children's event, but she did it, and she did it joyfully. She has been so helpful to me as a pastor's wife who has gone through so much, so supportive of me as a pastor, and for that I'll never forget. This is a woman that didn't want this to be about her. This is not about her. This is about how she's lived out God's purpose in the world in spite of all the difficulties she and Doug may have faced. And how if we just continue walking our purpose in life, God is with us. And God gives us the power and the grace to do that. Please welcome Elaine Crowder.
All right, your mic's working and everything?
Yes.
All right. Well, we met a couple weeks ago, and it's going to be an interview format, and we met a couple weeks ago to talk about this day. And so Audrey and I are going to ask you some questions, and we have a sort of things that we plan on, but we may just talk extemporaneously as well. There's so many people who know you here, and there's some people who don't know you that well. So tell us about your early years, where you grew up, and how that affected the person you became later in your life.
Well, I was born in a Christian home, and the church, Methodist church there in our little town, provided both our spiritual and our social life. My parents were farmers. We lived 7 miles out in the country on a gravel road. And I had a sister, and my dad raised beef cattle and hogs and alfalfa and corn and oats. And my mother had a large garden, and as well as raising chickens, and she canned all kinds of things. So we were quite independent or self-sufficient in there. And there was a little country school, one-room country school. It was a quarter of a mile away, and that's where my sister and I went to our first 8 grades. And then when it came time to go to high school, we had to provide our own transportation, and so Dad bought us a Willys Jeep, and I had my first driver's license when I was 14. We did not have electricity until I was about 13, and we depended upon the Nebraska wind. This is all northeast Nebraska. Nebraska wind to turn the windmills so that we would have water. And then we had an outhouse, which many of you don't even know what it is. All of this was great preparation for living in the interior of Congo.
Yeah, it's hard for us to imagine, in our day and age. So when did Jesus become real to you, and kind of what was your experience with church growing up?
Okay, we were always active and involved in church, and actually I made a public confession when I was about 13. Our family took a week's vacation at a family Bible conference. And it was one evening during the altar call that I went forward. But I had felt God leading me to mission before that even. And I did not hear a voice. I did not have a vision. But I just knew in my heart that that's what I was supposed to do. So.
Elaine, you're telling us about how you're called to ministry, and it was when you were 12. When did it kind of really take shape for you? Was there a time?
Well, I don't know. And certainly after Doug and I married, I went to Asbury College and met Doug when it was my senior year, and I was an education major. And he was at Asbury Theological Seminary, and it was his last year there. And he also had a church at Jacksboro, Tennessee, which is up in Campbell County. And so he was going there on weekends. So after we were married, it was only a short time, like 4 weeks or such a matter, until we received a letter from the Board of Global Ministries telling us that they would like to have us in Congo the following year. But the requirement was that we had to have a year of preparation at Scarrett College in Nashville. Well, we moved to Nashville, but the district superintendent was not able to replace Doug. He couldn't find a replacement. So every weekend, Doug left on Friday afternoon after the last class and returned to Jacksboro. And then he was back for services and responsibilities he had there. And on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, he was back in Nashville to go to classes again. It was not an ideal way to start your first year of marriage, but we made it work. And then it was at the close of that school year that we went to annual conference and were commissioned to go as missionaries to Congo.
I can only imagine as a young bride hearing the words that you were going to the Congo. What was there any point you thought, ooh, maybe, what's your second choice? Yeah.
Not really, no, because I had felt for so long, and Doug had a call during his youth too. So we each had individual calls, which was very important later when we were evacuating and all. It was not that I have heard some wives say, well, this was not my call, this was my husband's, and it wasn't. She wasn't too happy there, but we both had a call and knew that's what we were supposed to be doing.
We actually have a picture of Elaine and Doug being commissioned in 1958. And when we were actually, I told you this last week, when we were at annual conference last week, one of the bishops actually referenced you both because you went. And for those of you who don't know where the Congo is, we have a picture of where that is because some of our geography skills we may have lost. This is actually where it is. I want to go back a second, and I love the story you told of your honeymoon. Can we go back there?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, well, not all of it.
Well, yeah.
Watch it, Scott. Watch it.
Yes, this is on camera. That's right.
Yeah.
You told us about your life verse and how that came about. Could you tell everybody about that story?
Well, it was after we were married that day, and we had checked into the hotel, and the first thing that Doug said was, "We must choose a life verse for us." Well, I had been helping my father harvest the crops during the summer and trying to get ready for a wedding, and I had not been thinking about Bible verses. So he came up with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." And that has been our verse through always, and it continues to be just as effective today.
Yeah, it is.
So I don't know about if you were married, what your honeymoon was like, but picking your life verse, that just really impressed me. And one thing I told you this the other day, when Kate and I got married, we actually had the same Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 on our wedding bands, which is pretty awesome. Now, you were telling us a little bit, you're 38 years of the Congo. We have a picture also. Let's go to that picture. I think it's picture 4. You talked about when you got off and you were dressed up and in your heels going into the Congo. I just thought that. But you brought us some pictures and maybe a couple stories. Let's go to this next picture of this is what life was like. Can you tell us about some of these pictures?
Much. This was very typical of the village, and that lady is carrying she has rice on her back. She's had a good harvest, and she's on her way home from the garden with her load. But that is very typical of even little girls, young girls will have loads that will extend far up above their heads.
All right, and this next picture of, tell us about this. Oh, there we go.
Well, she's just preparing food, but she will also sell it to you if you want some of her manioc bread and little donuts that she has made there. But that is a typical way of cooking. I mean, everyone cooks outside because you have a small house, and so, well, that's just the way you do it.
All right. And then let's go to picture 8. I found this. Tell us a story. Where is this at?
Well, that is in a village church, obviously, because you can see the poles are just, and I think it's a grass roof. And there was a worship service that day. I happened to be sitting on the front seat, and there's another visitor with me. So, but that is a typical church service, and they have obviously, well, they gave me a good seat. The rest of them have boards that they are sitting on, but that was a real blessing when we were able to provide boards, because before that, people would just sit on the logs, and so.
Okay. What about, tell people what you did over those 38 years of ministry in the Congo.
What I did.
What you did in terms of the
what
ministries that you did.
Okay. When we we first were house parents and teachers for children of for missionary kids. But after independence, the Belgians had done a great job in educating the primary education, and there was a high rate of literacy, but it ended in 6th grade. There was nothing provided for the Congolese children above 6th grade. And so when independence came in 1960, the church leaders, because the church was very, very well established and strong, and the church leaders said, we must train our people and educate them. And so here they were, with real hope, move forward. There were neither buildings nor teachers, because everyone's education ended at 6th grade. But with determination, they opened up high schools. Well, they started because you could only add 1 year at a time. It took 6 years before they could offer a full high school diploma. And so they built temporary buildings that were used for years, out of mud and stick with grass roofs, and then the missionaries were all incorporated to be the teachers because there was no one else to do it. Everyone except the medical people, and they were left to do their own work. But that's how we got into education then, and Doug was a graduate of UT with a major in education, so he became a school director, which is like a superintendent, I guess, here, and taught the science classes. And he also taught in the Bible school, which was also on the station, the pastor training school. And so through all the years we were there, he continued to be a school director and teaching the science classes, as well as working in the church on the side. And my part was much more informal because these students who were pastors, were training to be pastors, all were required to have a wife. And that was so that when they went out in the village, their wife could help them and to help to raise the level of the women in the village too. And so a lot of those ladies had never been to school. And so it was a matter of teaching them to read and write and math and, child care and finances and hygiene and sewing and cooking. There was just so much and they went to school every afternoon. They had to go to their gardens in the morning so that they had food for their families. And so through the years, I helped with the women's education. I also, I homeschooled our girls, except back in those days, you'd never heard of homeschooling. And and then I was hostess for the station whenever the plane, which was a little Cessna plane, would come in. If it was at mealtime, I needed to make sure that there was food for the expatriates on the plane. The Congolese always took care of their own people, but for the expatriates, and then if the plane didn't leave, and it was night, night came on, then they needed lodging too. So that was part of my responsibility too. And yes, that pretty well covered it. I also did a lot with malnourished children to help with them.
Thank you. I want you to tell one more story. If you go to slide 14, there's a story behind this picture that I think would be helpful for our folks to hear.
Well, in 1964, the Chinese communists came into the northeastern part of the country and infiltrated a tribe there. And these zealous Congolese communists just went through the country and terrorized the population. And they came to our station where we were. And we were 5 couples, and those are the 5 husbands there. Anyway, and arrived and took our radio. That was our only means of communication with the outside world. And so after a day or two, the mission pilot flew over to see what was going on, and he dropped a note, and he said, if you are in danger, you sit. And everyone stood because we were not in danger. And the plane left, and we thought that he had gone back to his station, but he had landed. And I don't know what transpired at the airstrip, but this was a tribe that we could not communicate with. They spoke a language that neither we nor any of the local people understood. And so you were dealing with a very difficult situation. And they shot and killed the pilot. So then it was the following day, our senior missionary, who was also a doctor with 30 years of experience there in Congo, negotiated with these fellows who were heavily armed and high on drugs, plus not having a language. So you can imagine what kind of situation you have when you're doing negotiations with that situation. And one of the reasons that they wanted to get us out is we had two little girls. One was 3 and one was 5, and I was 4 months pregnant. And so they just wanted to get the women and children out. But the rebels refused to let the men go because they wanted everything to continue, the hospital to operate and the schools to operate and all. And so they agreed then for 2 planes to come in because these little Cessnas will only take out 3 or possibly 4 people at a time. And so the planes arrived as scheduled. And one sat down, and so when but the pilots had agreed that they would keep the second one in the air because they did not want to set both planes down because we already had one plane on the ground whose pilot had been killed. And so he circled, and this negotiations went on for an hour and a half or so. And finally, the plane that was circling up above left and went back toward the station where he'd come from because he was so low on gas. And then when they saw that the second plane was not going to land, they decided that the best thing to do was to just kill everybody. And so the pilot on the ground radioed to the pilot in the air and said, "You come back and land, and we need you to come back and land." And he said, "I can't come back and land." He said, "I don't have the gas to do so." And the pilot on the ground said, "You don't have a choice." He said, "We're all going to be shot if you don't come back and land." And so he came back and landed, and then they let the first plane, which was the mothers and children, take off, and we circled until the second plane was airborne. Then we flew together close to the 2 planes did, as slow as they could fly because there was not fuel to make the trip. And we were flying over heavy forest. Ordinarily, that trip would have taken an hour and a half, but we were flying slow. And night came on. And in the Congo, on the equator where we lived, the sun rises at 6 o'clock in the morning and it sets at 6 o'clock in the evening. When we arrived at the Presbyterian station, which was the nearest airfield that we had, it was completely dark and they had no electricity. So they had put cars at either end of the airstrip, which was just a grassy field. And we were able to land safely with the car lights. And everyone gathered around and held hands and prayed and thanked the Lord because there had been lots of prayers going up that day. There were a few people outside of the mission community that were aware of such a situation, but the mission community all pulled together.
And so that was,
and so this then, I'm sorry, this is it was 11 weeks later when the National Army finally came through and recaptured the area. And they had a load of wounded soldiers with them from a battle that they just fought up the road a ways. And so they took the men out with them to their headquarters. And when they got to their headquarters, they were able to radio and get a plane, and that was a mission plane behind them that had come in to pick them up. And so, and my husband's on the left there. They all looked pretty bedraggled, but they really were because they were riding in the back of military trucks, and Doug said that it rained on them for 2 days, and they were digging out because this was mud road, and after 2 days of rain on mud road, they had to even abandon some of the convoy. The military convoy had to abandon some of their vehicles because they just couldn't either get them out of. They were stuck so bad they couldn't get them out, or else they broke down and couldn't fix them on. So. And we had not heard from the men. There had been no word for that 11 weeks to know whether they were dead or alive or had been taken removed to taken someplace else or whatever. But they had some hard experiences too. Do you want me to?
Well, I mean, the good news is that you were reunited,
Yes.
and Doug survived, and they all survived, and this was
That's
afterwards,
right.
right? So I think Audrey's got a question for you.
But I can only imagine, two small children, you're pregnant, and your husband is captured, and you don't know if he's coming back or not.
That's right. And the day we left was our 7th wedding anniversary that we evacuated on. So, but God gave us an amazing peace because it was, if there's nothing you can do about it, you just have to put it in the Lord's hands. And so,
Good lesson. You've just told us of some of the challenges, but what was the most challenging and maybe the most rewarding about your work?
the only sacrifice that we ever made was sending our 10-year-old daughter away to boarding school. She went at the end of August. She came home at Christmas. She was home at Easter time, and then again for summer. So that was it. And then when the children finished high school, they came back to the States to college. And so it was 2 years at least before we saw them again. And so that was the only sacrifice, that we really had. The rewarding things were to see the church, how strong it was. When we arrived on the field, although everyone only had a 6th grade education, our pastors were well trained at that level. And, all of the pastors were Congolese. Our district superintendent was Congolese. It was 6 years later before we had a Congolese bishop. And and then also about Congo, about that time, about the time of independence, the Protestant churches in Congo went together and organized the Protestant University, which was a pretty amazing thing when you consider how little there was to work with. But each of the main Protestant churches had a couple of people who had received their PhDs, their doctorates, and so it was a legitimate university. And today that school is in Kinshasa. And at the time it was open only with theological education to train pastors. But they have added all these different departments now. And there are over 8,000 students, and half of them are female. So that is a pretty amazing thing in Africa. And the last 4 years they have graduated doctors. That they have, and those doctors receive do their internships in the mission hospitals. So it has been an amazing thing. I mean, in a country where the government doesn't work, the church is the only hope for the people.
I've had the privilege over the years to hear many stories, and one of the challenges she didn't mention, but I think it's worth noting, was that all her children were born in Africa and raised in Africa, but her first child was born in a hut with a thatched roof. No hospital, no nurse. And Anna, her second daughter, who's on the front row here, there were extenuating circumstances with Anna's first. Sarah, you're the only one lucked out. You're the only one who got to be born in a hospital. But she didn't even mention that. So having experienced all this in Africa, coming back to Lenoir City, was it a shock?
The most difficult thing we ever encountered was coming back to the States. We really tried to live off the land there. The people had eaten rice and manioc greens and dried beans and bananas and pineapple for centuries and lived on it. And we just felt like it was a real witness that their food was adequate for us. We did not need to be importing food. But they were all so poor. The average, no one had over $15 a month to live with, to support their families. And and I was constantly working with people whose children were malnourished, trying to help them get healthy again. And everyone was struggling to try to educate their children. It was just, it was a struggle for everyone. Then you come back into the USA, where we all have more than we ought to eat, and roof over our house, over our heads and all. And that was always the most difficult part of it, is just returning to the abundance, the materialism that we have here. But 25 years later, I have as much stuff as everybody else. So,
It does grow on you.
We have so much more we can share, and I'm trying to make it as time. I did have a picture of her husband, Doug, when this church was being constructed. And Doug was the associate pastor here, if you don't know, for 12 years. And he passed on. And then Elaine has been super active in prayer ministry, in card ministry, visiting people. Could you just share a word of why do you serve so much? Like, why do you go to all these things? Why do you do that?
I enjoy it. I find pleasure in it. It's much more interesting and fun to go visit somebody than it is to clean a house. So, but I grew up where we always visited and so forth. Even as a young child, I remember going to visit people who were probably not as old as I am, but they seemed like they were antiques. And it's been a joy, I find. And we all need to be in service to the Lord. We don't retire from the Lord. Even if our mobility is limited, we still have prayer. And that is, to me, we too often forget how powerful that prayer is. And so that is our challenge.
I want you to know that you have no idea how often Elaine has prayed for all of you. All of you. And as the person responsible for congregational care, when there's a really, really tough case, I phone Elaine and get her praying. And when I tell people that Elaine is praying for them, you have no idea the difference it makes. Their face lights up and they look at me and they say to me, I know I'm going to be okay now. Elaine's praying for me. So your ministry has had a profound effect on these people, the people of Central, but also this church as a whole. Thank you, Elaine.
That is what is basic for all of us. I mean, I tell that to people, in the assisted livings who don't think they can do anything anymore, that there is power in prayer, and that is what they should do.
Amen.
I have one more question, and then we're going to pray a prayer all together, and then we're going to give a benediction. But I want to give you this opportunity of, the age in which we live today. Do you have a word of encouragement or a word of challenge for those of us who need to hear that today?
Well, the last year has been a difficult one for pastors and all, with so many churches leaving the United Methodist Church. And I think about our vision that we have to to help people to find and follow Jesus. And that is, I think, what we all need to be. Our challenge is to help people find and follow Jesus. But we have to be faithful in order to do that. And I think on good days, it's easy to let Jesus' light shine through you. But what about the days when the equipment doesn't work at work, and you can't get the parts, or someone severely disagrees with you, or your coworker just lets you down. Do they see Jesus in us on those kinds of days? Because that's what the real test is. I mean, when the outside world looks at, crises, what do people really see? Do they see Jesus in living in me, in each of us?
Well, thank you. It's well said. And Elaine, we love you, and these people, Central loves you, and we thank you for the model and example you have of what it means to follow Jesus. So thank you for sharing some of your story today. Yeah, let's thank God for Elaine.
Elaine, look at